I almost deleted the footage. It was just background noise at first. Holiday chatter, clinking dishes, distant laughter I wasn't part of. But something told me to keep listening. And then I heard it. If she's slipping, that actually works in our favor. My daughter-in-law's voice. Calm, calculated. Like she'd rehearsed it. That Christmas I had shown up with a homemade pie and a heart still full of hope. I was seated in the kitchen, not at the table. My gift was brushed aside. I was barely seen. But when I downloaded the recording from the intercom that night, something in me shifted. Grant, the lawyer my best friend found, listened to every word. And when the clip ended, he looked at me and said, "They've marked you as weak. But they have no idea who they just tried to cross." That was the moment I stopped being quiet. And everything changed from there. It was Christmas morning, and I was already up before the sun tying my scarf twice, even though I knew it wasn't that cold. I wasn't excited, just awake. It had become a habit over the years. Early rising. Quiet presence. Making myself useful in places where no one really asked for help, but I offered it anyway. That's how I'd spent most of my adult life, really. Being useful. Especially to my son. Jackson had invited me to their Christmas gathering again this year. Or rather, Chloe had sent a text 2 weeks earlier. "Hi, Margaret. We'd love for you to come help with prep again this year. Lunch starts around 2, but feel free to come earlier if you want to beat the snow." That was her version of warm. I replied, "I'll be there." Short, polite. I had already begun to learn that fewer words left fewer places to get hurt. I packed the gifts in a paper bag with reinforced handles. Nothing fancy, just what I could carry easily. For Chloe, a handmade lavender sachet I stitched myself. For Jackson, a wool scarf I'd ordered from a place he used to love as a teenager. For Lucas, my grandson, I tucked in a puzzle game, and a tin of the ginger cookies he always said reminded him of Grandma's hugs. And even though I'd already decided not to stay too long, I brought along a bottle of red wine I'd kept for years. Saved for no special reason, really. That's the thing about saving nice things. If you wait too long, people stop seeing the value in them. I arrived around 11:15. Chloe opened the door with a smile that felt like a quick flash of teeth rather than warmth. She looked good as always. Perfectly polished nails, done makeup fresh even this early. "You're early," she said, already turning back toward the kitchen. "The potatoes are waiting on you." I smiled. Of course. No hug. No Merry Christmas. That part had been skipped years ago somewhere after their 3rd anniversary. I took off my coat, careful not to drop anything. Or so I thought. The kitchen was loud with timers and background music. Some modern holiday remix that made me feel like I'd walked into a department store rather than my son's home. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I didn't ask where to start. I already knew. Chloe ran the kitchen like a restaurant. Efficient, exacting cold. At one point, I placed the wine gently on the counter. Chloe glanced over and smiled, but not in a kind way. "Oh, that old bottle, that's sweet. We've got the rosé I picked up last week. It's organic." She turned back to her phone. I said nothing. Jackson came down the stairs with Lucas clinging to one hand and a gift bag in the other. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, kissing the air near my cheek. "Glad you made it." Lucas gave me a quick hug before darting off to the living room. I hadn't seen Jackson in over a month. He didn't ask how I was. No one did, really. I'd stopped expecting that kind of care years ago. Still standing over a sink full of dishes that weren't mine, chopping herbs with a knife that wasn't sharp. I tried to tell myself this was what Christmas meant now. Being part of the noise, not the celebration. By 1:30, the other guests had arrived. Chloe's mother and stepfather, her 2 sisters and their husbands. I noticed how Chloe placed her own mother at the head of the table and gave her the biggest plate. I was still wiping counters and stacking plates in the kitchen when I realized there was no chair left for me. I peeked into the dining room, trying not to look obvious. My name wasn't on any of the little place cards. Chloe came up behind me. "Oh," she said, her voice too high. "We didn't know if you'd want to eat now or just later with the kitchen crew. But there's still some space at the breakfast bar." The breakfast bar. That's where the children usually sat. I nodded, told her I'd eat later, and returned to the kitchen. My hands were starting to shake. Not from anger, not quite, but from that feeling that you've been erased while still being in the room. I picked up my coat around 4. It was too warm to wear, but I needed something to do with my hands. I reached into the pocket for my keys, and that's when it happened. The folder. My personal folder, the one I'd taken to the bank last week to get copies of my updated account summaries. It slipped right out of the lining and fell open on the hallway bench. Chloe was walking past, a glass of champagne in hand. She paused, glancing down. "Oh," she said, bending slightly. "Let me get that for you." I reached for it, but she was quicker. She picked up the papers neatly, her eyes darting over the first page before she handed them back. Her smile didn't falter, but I saw it. The flicker in her eyes. A sharp little gleam, like a light turning on in a locked room. She said nothing, just patted the folder and stepped away. And in that moment, I knew I should have gone home after the cookies. Because Chloe didn't ask me about the money. She didn't act surprised. She just filed that information away behind a polished smile. And in that exact silence, I realized she had already decided it didn't belong to me for much longer. When I sat on the bus home, yes, the bus, because Jackson had mentioned earlier that they needed the driveway clear for guests, I held the folder tighter than I meant to. I kept thinking, why did I bring those papers? Why didn't I leave them locked up where they belonged? But the truth, some part of me had wanted them to know. Not for power, not for pride, but because I was tired of pretending I had nothing left. I stared out the window. Christmas lights blinked on porches like little false promises. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a mother or a guest or even an elder. I felt like a ghost passing through a celebration that used to mean something. A quiet woman who had stayed quiet too long. And somewhere inside me, something small and cold shifted. I didn't know what Chloe would do with what she now knew. But I had a sinking feeling that silence wouldn't protect me this time. I didn't sleep well that night. Back home in my quiet little house, I set the folder of financial papers back in its proper place in the desk drawer, but I didn't lock it. I just sat there for a while, staring at the wood grain, my fingers lightly brushing the edge of the drawer, trying to quiet the noise in my mind. That flicker in Chloe's eyes wouldn't leave me. I had seen it before in different forms. When she'd spoken over me during holidays, when she'd shifted conversations to center her mother, when she'd subtly redirected Jackson's attention like it was hers to command. But this was different. This was calculation. It was the look of someone who had just discovered something valuable and was already planning how to use it. Still, I told myself not to overthink. Maybe she'd let it go. Maybe I was imagining the worst. I shouldn't have gone back the next day, but I did. Jackson had called that morning. Not to thank me for the help, not to apologize for the awkwardness, but to ask if I could come by and pick up the Tupperware I'd left behind. As if that plastic container couldn't wait a few days. But I said yes. I always said yes. It was late afternoon when I arrived. Chloe wasn't home, apparently out shopping with her mother. Jackson greeted me in a hurry, distracted, and pointed toward the kitchen where my things were neatly stacked. I gathered them quietly. On my way out, I passed by the side hall where the old intercom system sat. An artifact from when the house had belonged to a retired dentist with speakers in most rooms. Chloe used it to make dinner announcements when the family gathered. I had always found that silly. As I passed, I heard something faint but unmistakable. Voices. Jackson's voice. And Chloe's. I froze. I hadn't realized the system was on, and maybe neither had they. Someone had pressed the talk button in the den without noticing. I stepped back slightly, standing near the hallway speaker, and listened. Not to be intrusive, but because something told me I had to hear this. She's been sitting on that money for how long? Chloe's voice, sharp low. 20 million, Jackson. And she still shops at the discount store like she's got nothing. That's not normal. She doesn't owe us anything, Jackson replied quieter. It's her inheritance. Oh, come on. Are you serious? Chloe scoffed. Your dad died over a decade ago. She's alone in that little house doing God knows what. You don't think Lucas deserves a better future? A college fund, a bigger home. There was a long silence. I could hear the faint creak of furniture as if someone had sat down heavily. She's always been generous, Jackson said eventually. She helped with the down payment on this place. Paid off my student loan. Watched Lucas for a whole year when we couldn't afford daycare. Chloe's tone shifted, more measured now. Exactly. That's what mothers do. They help. But she's not giving anymore, is she? And let's be honest, she's getting older. Her memory's slipping. You've seen it. That's not fair, Jackson said. But his voice was less certain now. She forgets small things. Names of stores. A birthday once. She forgot where she parked at Target last month, Jackson. Everyone forgets where they park. Not for an hour. And not 3 times in 2 weeks. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. Was this how they saw me? As someone fading? Chloe continued, her voice softening, like she was coaxing a child. Look, I'm not saying we go after her like villains. But if she's not capable of managing that kind of money, and clearly she's not, then maybe it's time the court helps her. Helps her, Jackson asked, guarded. There are laws for this. Protective guardianship. Financial conservatorship. All legal. If the court agrees she's declining, we could step in. Help manage things. Make sure nothing gets lost or wasted. And if the court doesn't agree, we make a strong case. I've already spoken to someone who knows the process. I felt something cold rise in my chest. They'd already begun. My own son. My daughter-in-law. Planning to use the law to strip me of control over my own life. Jackson was quiet for a while. Then he said, I don't want her to hate me. She won't, Chloe said almost sweetly. She'll thank you eventually. When it's all in order and we're taking care of things. Besides, if she's slipping, she won't even remember being angry. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not because they doubted me, but because they no longer saw me as a person capable of knowing what was mine. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe for a full minute. I just stood there absorbing it like a blow. And then without making a sound, I stepped away from the speaker. I didn't confront them. I didn't knock on the door and demand answers. I just walked out. Outside, the air was sharp with winter. The sun was low and thin, casting long shadows over their perfect lawn. I sat in my car with the Tupperware box in my lap and stared at the steering wheel. For 35 years, I had been a mother who gave time, money, effort, love, even when I was tired, even when no one thanked me. I did it because that's what I believed love meant, giving without measuring. But what I had just heard, that wasn't love. That wasn't family. That was strategy. Cold, calculated, and legal. They were building a case against me. Carefully, quietly. And Jackson, my boy, my only child, was letting them. At home, I didn't eat dinner. I just sat in the living room with the lights off, a mug of tea going cold beside me. I replayed their words again and again. Chloe's persuasion. Jackson's hesitation turning into consent. Her voice calm and pleasant while she mapped out a future that didn't include my consent. As if I were already gone. That was when it hit me. I had been raising a man who no longer remembered who raised him. I sat for hours that night. When I finally stood, I walked over to the desk, pulled open the drawer again, and looked down at the folder I'd taken with me yesterday. I pulled it out, placed it on the dining table, and added a new section. Documentation of financial support I'd given Jackson over the years. Bank transfers. Email confirmations. Loan notes. If they wanted to turn this into a legal matter, then I would meet them in that courtroom. Not as a fragile woman they thought they could manipulate, but as the mother they underestimated for the last time. The roads were mostly empty when I left their house. The holiday traffic had thinned out, and all that remained was the occasional shimmer of headlights moving slowly through town. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove in silence, both hands tight on the steering wheel. My knuckles were white by the time I pulled into the parking lot of the 24-hour grocery store near my neighborhood. Not because I needed groceries, but because I couldn't go home just yet. The car idled while I sat there staring straight ahead. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I didn't even feel shocked anymore. It was worse than that. I felt hollow. Like I'd been scooped out from the inside and what was left of me was too light to matter. I kept thinking of Chloe's voice. So calm. So reasonable. The way she said guardianship like it was a favor. The way Jackson didn't protest. At least not in the way a son should have. He was worried I'd be mad. Not that I'd be hurt. Not that it would betray everything I'd ever done for him. I pulled the keys from the ignition and just sat there. I don't know how long I stayed in that spot. 10 minutes. Maybe 30. At one point I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, waiting for the tears that never came. But nothing happened. Just the quiet hum of the engine cooling. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I passed Jackson's name, Chloe's, Lucas's, and then I landed on Diane. Diane Carter had been my neighbor for 22 years before she moved across town to live closer to her daughter. We still spoke every few weeks. Brief check-ins, usually polite and upbeat. She was the one person who always told me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it. I hesitated before calling. It was nearly midnight, but the silence inside me felt too loud. So I pressed the button. She picked up on the third ring. Margaret. Everything okay? I tried to speak, but my voice caught. Not from tears, just from something deeper. A tiredness that didn't feel like sleep could fix. Diane, I whispered. I think my son is about to do something I can't forgive. She was quiet for a moment, then said, Where are you in my car? Outside the grocery store. I'm coming. No, I said quickly. I just needed to hear someone who isn't lying to me. Her voice softened. What happened? I told her. Not everything. Just the part about the overheard conversation. The mention of guardianship. Chloe's plan. Jackson's silence. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause, then she said, I'm so sorry. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Then came the part I needed to hear. Margaret, she said slowly. If they've chosen that path, you can't use your heart to fight it. You'll lose. I stared at my hands. What am I supposed to use instead? Proof, she said. Facts. Paper. Dates. Numbers. You've always kept everything, haven't you? I think so. Then start there. I drove home shortly after. The street was quiet. My porch light had gone out again. I made a mental note to replace the bulb, though I doubted anyone would visit soon. Inside, I didn't bother taking off my coat. I walked straight to the hallway closet, pulled down the 2 storage bins I hadn't touched in years, and set them on the dining table. Receipts. Checkbooks. Printed emails. I'd saved everything. Every transfer. Every promissory note scribbled on the back of Jackson's old college applications. I even had the lease documents where I co-signed his first apartment and the invoice for the private school tuition I paid for Lucas's kindergarten year. I sat there sorting as the hours slipped by. At one point, I opened a dusty blue binder labeled Mortgage Help, 2014. Inside were 4 cashier's check stubs. I'd given Jackson $50,000 that year to keep his home from foreclosure. He said he'd pay it back as soon as things settled. They never did. I found another envelope with printed emails from when he'd asked for help with student loans. Another $28,000. And a third envelope. This one I had almost forgotten about, containing flight receipts and hotel bookings from when Chloe's mother had her surgery in Arizona. I'd paid for everything. Quietly. No one ever thanked me. It wasn't about the money. Not then. It was about love. Family. Showing up when no one else could. But now, sitting alone at the table with stacks of paper surrounding me like a fortress, I began to see it differently. It wasn't love they remembered. It was opportunity. I'd become a safety net they didn't even glance at until they needed to fall. Around 3 A. I called Grant Turner's office and left a voicemail. I knew he wouldn't hear it until morning, but it made me feel like I'd taken the first step. I didn't say much. Just that I had a potential legal matter involving family and finances, and I needed someone who specialized in elder rights. Then I kept working. I made lists, tallied totals, grouped transactions by year and purpose, cross-referenced bank statements. I made copies of everything and labeled them clearly. By sunrise, I had over 2 inches of organized documentation in front of me. I stood back from the table and exhaled for the first time in hours. This was my story told not with words but with proof. When I looked in the mirror that morning, I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Not the quiet woman who smiled through every slight. Not the helper in the kitchen. Not the babysitter they only called when they needed something. I saw Margaret Ellison. Wife. Mother. Giver. And for the first time in decades, protector of herself. I made a cup of coffee, added exactly 1 sugar cube, and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. The sky outside was soft gray, tinged with morning light. The kind of winter dawn that promised snow, but never followed through. I thought about Jackson's voice, Chloe's certainty, Lucas's laugh, how innocent he still was. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I was awake. And this time I wasn't going back to sleep. It came in a red envelope. At first I thought it was a late holiday card. Some belated well-wishing from a distant friend, a warm note with a picture of someone's grandchildren, or a family newsletter filled with ski trips and cookie recipes. I held it between my fingers for a moment, admiring the deep, glossy crimson and the way it caught the January light. But when I turned it over, I saw the return address. A law firm. one I didn't recognize. My stomach sank. I opened it at the kitchen counter, hands steady in motion but trembling beneath the surface. Inside was a letter. Not a warm greeting, not a note of thanks, or even a receipt of some kind. It was a legal notice. Petition for conservatorship. Filed jointly by Jackson Ellison and Chloe Ellison. Requesting the court to grant them full control over my finances, citing evidence of cognitive decline, irregular financial behavior, and inability to make sound decisions regarding personal estate. I read the page twice. Then a third time. And then I sat down. I couldn't cry. I couldn't even move for a few minutes. All I could do was stare at the words printed on that thick white paper, so formal and clinical in tone, as if they were talking about a stranger. As if I weren't real. As if I were already gone. The evidence section was attached. That's where the burn started. There was a grainy photo, clearly taken without my knowledge, of me standing in the Target parking lot looking confused. I remembered that day. My phone had died. I couldn't remember whether I parked in row B or row C. I'd wandered a little longer than usual, but I found the car. I drove home. I was fine. They had clipped it and presented it as proof of mental decline. There was also a report from a doctor, one I had never met. I scanned the name. Then it hit me. He was Chloe's cousin. A family doctor, someone who probably owed her a favor. His brief letter suggested that based on second-hand accounts and observed behavior, I may be showing signs of early-stage dementia. Observed by whom second-hand accounts? My hands began to shake in earnest. I flipped to the last page. There it was signed and stamped their official request that the court freeze my assets until a decision could be made. They were trying to take everything. Not just the money, but my agency, my dignity, my right to make decisions about my own life. A loud knock at the door broke the silence. It was the mail carrier dropping off a few more envelopes and smiling politely. I tried to smile back, but I must have looked strange. His smile faded as he handed me the stack. "You okay, ma'am?" I nodded. "Yes, thank you. Just sorting through some surprises." He tipped his hat and left. I locked the door behind him and stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, trying not to let the panic rise. And then I reached for my phone. I called Diane. She picked up almost immediately. "Margaret." "They filed," I said. "They filed for conservatorship." Silence. "Then I'll be there in 20 minutes. 23 minutes later, Diane walked through my front door carrying a thermos of coffee and a look that could slice glass. She didn't ask to see the papers. I handed them to her and she read them quietly at my dining table while I sat across from her, hands folded tightly in my lap. When she finished, she looked up at me. "You need someone who deals with elder law. Specifically, financial abuse. Someone who doesn't get rattled by this kind of garbage. Do you know someone?" She nodded. "Grant Turner. He's handled 2 cases for friends of mine. Both times the family tried to railroad someone into guardianship for money. He doesn't just fight back. He dismantles them piece by piece." "Can I afford him?" I asked quietly. "You can." I smiled faintly. "Right?" Diane pulled out her phone and called his office right there at my table. She left a message explaining the situation briefly and asking for an urgent consultation. By the time she hung up, her expression had settled into something calm but dangerous. "They don't know who they're dealing with, Margaret. They think you're soft because you bake cookies and let them talk over you at holidays. But I've seen what you're capable of when you decide something matters." I wanted to believe her, but all I felt in that moment was old. "Maybe they're right," I whispered. Maybe I do forget things. Maybe I've let myself fade too far into the background. Diane leaned forward. No, you haven't faded. They just stopped looking at you. That night I sat at my desk staring at the copy of the petition again. The words blurred for a moment, not because of tears, but because I was tired. Deeply tired. But then something strange happened. I stood up. I walked to the closet, pulled out the accordion file I'd prepared the week before. The one full of receipts, transfers, and loan agreements I'd given Jackson over the years. I laid it all out again. The whole history of my quiet giving. And then I went to my computer and opened a browser. Chloe's public social media profile was full of curated posts, home decor, designer shoes, inspirational quotes. But what caught my eye was a new post from that morning. A photo of Lucas playing in the snow captioned, "So grateful for this little guy. Doing everything we can to build him a secure future #family. First #grateful, mama." I stared at it for a long time. And then I saw something else. Comments from friends. People praising Chloe's strength. Someone wrote, "You're amazing for taking care of your MIL." Not many would help someone so lost. Lost. She'd already planted the story. And it was working. It wasn't enough to try to take my money. She was shaping a narrative in public. One where she was the hero. Where I was the fragile old woman lucky to have her in my life. I closed the laptop. I picked up my phone and recorded a video. Just in case. I looked into the camera and said calmly, "My name is Margaret Ellison. I am of sound mind and in full control of my financial and personal decisions. Any suggestion to the contrary is not based on medical diagnosis, but manipulation and greed. This is my statement. Dated January 4th, 9:13 p.m. I saved it. Uploaded it to a private cloud. Emailed it to myself and Diane. It was just the beginning. The next day, Grant Turner's assistant called to schedule a consultation. And I was ready. Not because I wanted a fight, but because I finally understood. If I didn't protect myself, no one else would. Grant Turner didn't blink once as he flipped through the stack of documents I laid out before him. We sat in a quiet office downtown, his desk orderly, the window blinds drawn against the glare of a cold January afternoon. He wore simple wire-rimmed glasses and a navy sweater over a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow like someone who was never quite done working. He didn't smile much, but he listened like a man who made his living weighing truth and instinct in equal measure. When he finally looked up, he didn't start with the law. He said, "Tell me when you first felt something shift." I told him everything. The Christmas invitation that felt more like a summons. The seatless dinner. Chloe's eyes when she saw the folder. The overheard conversation through the intercom. The red envelope. He nodded slow and measured. They're doing something more calculated than most. But they're sloppy. Sloppy? I asked, surprised. You'll see, he said. Then he leaned back in his chair and tapped his pen lightly against the edge of the desk. Here's what I recommend. We don't rush. We don't storm in and threaten counter lawsuits. We let them go a little further. Every move they make now will be made with overconfidence. They think you're already cornered. They'll show their hand. He leaned forward. Our job is to watch and document everything. I nodded. That I can do. And I did. That night, I began what became my second full-time job, organizing the past 20 years of my life into something that could speak on my behalf. I started with the oldest files, Those faded green carbon copies from when Jackson was fresh out of college, nervous, overwhelmed, and asking for help with rent. I'd co-signed his first lease. I'd also co-signed the loan for his first car, which they traded in for something newer 2 years later without ever telling me. In the shoebox labeled Loan Agreements, I found handwritten notes signed and dated. Jackson had always said, "Just something informal, Mom. Doesn't have to be legal." But I had always insisted. I wasn't being distrustful. I was being thorough. That's how my husband and I had lived. Keep records, don't assume memory is enough. Each note had a date, a signature, a purpose. $5,000 for medical bills, $3, $200 for home repair, $1,000 for Chloe's business license. I photocopied everything, labeled the copies by year, indexed the folders. I had no intention of humiliating Jackson, but I wasn't going to let them turn me into a helpless old woman who couldn't tell her left from her right. Grant asked for bank statements. I went further. I printed every monthly statement from the last 20 years. I highlighted transfers, marked notes on the margins where necessary, attached copies of emails that corresponded to those dates. It was exhausting, but oddly empowering. For so long I'd lived in the background, on the edge of their lives, in the wings of their stories. Now the paper trail proved what memory alone never could, that I had always shown up. That my love hadn't been silent. It had been signed and documented, check by check, sacrifice by sacrifice. After a few days, Grant came by to see the progress. He skimmed the materials, brows lifting slightly. "This is excellent. They'll claim those were gifts. But you've got signatures, notes, descriptions. That's not a gift. That's a loan." He paused. "Do you still have access to that intercom system?" I nodded. "Let's get a copy of that Christmas conversation if we can." Voice, evidence, is powerful, especially when no one knows it exists. I hadn't thought of that. Back home, I pulled out the outdated owner's manual from a drawer in the laundry room and figured out how to access the internal recordings. To my surprise, the system kept backups. Short time-stamped clips stored to a tiny SD card tucked behind the wall unit. I slid the card into my computer. There it was. December 25th, 3:24 p.m. I clicked play. Chloe's voice rang out, sharp and unmistakable. "If she's slipping, that actually works in our favor. Then Jackson, I don't want her to hate me. And then Chloe again. She won't even remember being angry." I copied the file, saved it under multiple backups, uploaded it to a private drive, and shared it with Grant. He called back the next morning. "That clip is gold," he said. "Let them try to say this was about care. We've got premeditation, clear intent to manipulate. You'd be surprised how much judges pay attention when malice is this plain." He paused, and I could almost hear the tight smile behind his voice. "They think you're alone, Margaret." "That's their mistake." I exhaled. "They know I've been quiet all my life. They think that means weak." "Then they don't know you," he said. A week later, Chloe began making her next move, this time online. She posted a long caption under a filtered photo of Lucas at a playground. It started innocently. Being a mom is everything. But by paragraph 3, the narrative shifted. Watching a loved one slowly lose touch with reality is heartbreaking. We're doing our best, protecting what's rightfully family. The comments came flooding in. Sending love. "You're doing the right thing, sweetie. Your MIL is lucky to have you." It made my skin crawl. But I didn't respond. I didn't call Jackson. I didn't comment or cry or warn. Instead, I printed it. I added the post to a folder titled Narrative Manipulation. Underneath it, I taped a screenshot of her shoe order the same day. Won $200 designer boots she'd purchased with her credit card just hours after filing their legal request to freeze my assets. People like Chloe often reveal themselves without realizing it. I let her keep talking. Meanwhile, Grant filed a quiet motion. Not a countersuit, but a preliminary evidence package to block the freezing of my accounts. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to force the court to pause, take a second look and ask, "Are we sure about this?" It worked. Their emergency petition for asset control was denied pending full hearing. That was our first win. And no one saw it coming. Not Jackson. Not Chloe. They hadn't yet realized that every receipt I'd kept meant something. They hadn't counted on me being methodical. They'd underestimated the power of a mother who'd spent her life doing the books, double-checking the math, and remembering everything no one else bothered to write down. As I filed the latest batch of documents into the cabinet, I paused my hand on the drawer. I wasn't angry. Not in the way I used to understand anger. I was prepared. And I was still Margaret Ellison. Quiet. Careful. And now, unshakable. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and something older. Paper, nerves, maybe the weight of lives being argued over. It was a small courtroom, nothing like the grand wood-paneled rooms you see in legal dramas. Just beige walls, gray carpet, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look more tired than they were. I sat at the table beside Grant, hands folded in my lap, my handbag resting quietly at my feet. I had chosen a simple navy dress one I used to wear to church back when I still went regularly. My hair was neatly brushed. I wore my late husband's watch, not because it matched, but because it steadied me. Across from us, Chloe sat next to her attorney, dressed in an ivory blouse, with perfectly creased sleeves, her hair in a low chignon. Jackson was beside her, silent eyes fixed on the floor. He hadn't looked at me once since we entered the room. The judge entered. A woman in her late 50s, efficient and no-nonsense. She scanned the file briefly before glancing toward Chloe's attorney. "We'll begin with the petitioners," she said. Chloe's lawyer stood and began his opening. He spoke in measured tones full of concern. "Your Honor, this is not a case of greed. This is a case of protection. Mrs. Ellison is 80 years old, recently widowed, and has shown repeated signs of memory decline. The petitioners, her son and daughter-in-law, only seek to ensure her safety and financial stability." I sat still. I didn't flinch. Not when he called me vulnerable, not when he suggested I had trouble dressing myself. Grant had prepared me. He said they would try to paint me as fragile, as confused, that I had to let it roll past me without reacting. Then Chloe stood to speak. She didn't cry right away. She started slowly with a trembling voice that she worked to keep composed. "I love my mother-in-law," she said. "This has been so painful." Her hand clutched a tissue. Not used yet, but perfectly folded. "She's been getting lost when she runs errands," she said. "She forgets appointments. A few weeks ago she called me by the wrong name and asked where her husband was. He's been gone for 12 years. She paused as if to let the weight of that land. I didn't want to believe it, she continued. But then she left her oven on for hours. And once she thought I was the cleaning lady. She asked me how much I charge. I heard a quiet gasp from someone behind me. One of the gallery observers, maybe. Chloe bowed her head and dabbed her eyes with the tissue. It was finally used. Jackson still didn't speak. The judge looked at him. "Mr. Ellison, do you have anything to add?" He hesitated. His fingers tapped his knee. I just want to help my mom, he said finally. I don't want her to end up in a bad situation. He didn't look up. Not once. When it was our turn, Grant stood slowly. No theatrics. Just calm, deliberate pacing. Your Honor, he began. We don't deny that Mrs. Ellison is aging. We all are. But aging is not incapacity. And care is not control. He walked to the table, lifted a small binder, and held it up. This is a record of every financial transfer Mrs. Ellison has made over the last 10 years. She did these on her own. No mistakes. No errors. Her taxes. Filed by hand. Every year. Her bills paid on time. Her charitable donations. Tracked with spreadsheets. He placed the binder on the judge's desk. This woman is not in decline. She is organized, rational, and lucid. Then he tapped the second binder. This one contains evidence of her son and daughter-in-law's spending habits. Thousands of dollars in designer purchases. Vacations. A car lease in Mrs. Ellison's name, one she was not informed of. Chloe flinched. The judge's eyebrows lifted. Grant didn't pause. And this, he said, lifting a small speaker from his briefcase, is a recording made, legally, from a household intercom system. He pressed play. Chloe's voice echoed through the courtroom. If she's slipping that actually works in our favor, then Jackson, I don't want her to hate me. Then Chloe again. She won't even remember being angry. The room changed. You could feel it. A stiffness. A collective intake of breath. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. Grant let the silence hang. Then he said quietly, "That is not concern. That is strategy." Chloe's lawyer stood quickly objecting to the use of unauthorized recordings. But Grant countered before the judge even responded. The recording was from a system installed and owned by Mrs. Ellison. No laws broken. No rights violated. Just truth. The judge waved off the objection. She turned to Chloe. Would you like to explain the context of that recording? Chloe's lips parted, but no words came. Her face had gone pale beneath her flawless foundation. Jackson shifted in his seat, still looking down. The judge turned back to Grant. Please continue. He walked slowly to the front of the room. Your Honor, this isn't about oversight. It's about control. Mrs. Ellison holds significant assets. Assets her family wants to access without her consent. This petition isn't motivated by love. It's motivated by entitlement. He placed the last document on the judge's bench. A sworn statement from Mrs. Ellison's actual physician. Not a cousin. Not someone related to the petitioners. A neutral medical evaluation completed just last week. It reads, no evidence of cognitive impairment. Patient is oriented, articulate, and in full possession of executive function. He paused, then added, which is more than I can say for the people trying to take her rights away. The judge sat back in her chair. She didn't smile, but she nodded slowly. We'll reconvene for deliberation, she said. Petitioners be advised. Fabricating claims of mental incapacity is a serious matter, especially when financial motivation is evident. She banged the gavel lightly. Recess. As people stood and began to file out, I remained seated. Chloe pushed past quickly, head down, cheeks red. Jackson lingered. For a moment I thought he might look at me. But he didn't. He walked out with his hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. I turned to Grant. "Thank you." He shook his head. "It's not over. But they're rattled now. That's the first step." Outside the courthouse, the winter wind had picked up. Diane was waiting for me with a warm coat folded over her arm. "You were magnificent," she said. "I didn't do anything." "Yes, you did," she replied. "You stood your ground." "That counts." I nodded and looked up at the gray sky. It wasn't justice yet. But for the first time in a long time, the truth had been louder than the lies. It started with a live stream. 3 days after the court hearing, Chloe sat in front of a softly lit camera framed perfectly in their living room, with a neutral background and a strategically placed tissue box. She wore a beige sweater that matched the decor and a barely there layer of makeup that gave her a tired but brave look. The caption beneath the video read, "When family forgets to love. My truth. Please be kind." I didn't watch it live. Diane did. She texted me halfway through. "She's turning the internet into a sympathy circus." I wasn't surprised. Chloe had always been good at curating emotions, selecting which parts of her life deserved lighting filters and violins. In the video, she cried softly. She spoke of betrayal, of pain. She said I loved her like a mother. I only wanted to protect her. But she has money, and she's chosen to withhold it. Not just from us, but from Lucas. From her own grandson. She paused, dabbed at her perfectly lined eyes, and added, "I'm not the villain. I'm the daughter-in-law who stayed when no one else would." Within hours, the video had tens of thousands of views. Chloe's followers, most of them fellow Mother's Lifestyle fans and women who admired her chic home organization tips, began flooding the comments with hearts and support. "Stay strong. Mama, she doesn't deserve you. Elderly narcissists are so toxic. I see you. Protect that sweet boy." But then something shifted. At exactly the 14-hour mark, an anonymous user with the handle @JusticeJune, posted a collage in the comments. Side-by-side screenshots, Chloe's tearful livestream, and an Instagram story from just a few weeks earlier. In the story, Chloe stood poolside at a luxury resort in Palm Springs, holding a glass of champagne and flashing a diamond-studded watch. The caption read, "Needed this escape. Grateful for abundance. #HealedGirlEra." The date stamp. The same week, she and Jackson had filed the petition to have me declared mentally unfit. People started asking questions. Someone else posted screenshots of her online shopping hauls. Designer handbags. A pair of boots that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Another found the shoe order confirmation from the very day they'd tried to freeze my assets. And then Diane, dear strategic fierce Diane, posted something that no influencer could spin. A thread on her Facebook page. The headline, "When Love Turns Legal. What Really Happened to Margaret Ellison." She summarized the lawsuit, the forged claims, the intercom recording, the court's reaction, the denial of asset freezing. She didn't embellish. She didn't insult. She simply laid out the facts. And at the end of the thread she added, "No amount of tears can rewrite truth. Family isn't who posts about you. It's who protects you when no one's watching. #NotYourInheritance." That hashtag caught fire. Within 48 hours, it was trending on several platforms. People began using it to share their own stories. Grandmothers pushed aside elderly parents, manipulated trust, broken in the name of care. And suddenly, Chloe wasn't the victim anymore. She was the cautionary tale. Influencer gossip accounts picked it up. Legal commentary channels dissected the hearing transcript and posted clips from the intercom recording which someone, likely Diane, had leaked to a journalist. The quote, "If she's slipping that actually works in our favor," became a meme. A damning one. Jackson, meanwhile, tried to stay quiet. But the internet doesn't like silence from accomplices. By day 4, someone had found his LinkedIn profile and started tagging his employer. Commenters demanded answers. They posted screenshots of his connections, his old posts about family values, and asked whether his company endorsed what he and his wife had done. By Friday, he was called into a private HR meeting. And just like that, he was put on leave. Pending internal review, the statement said. He came home to find Chloe pacing in the living room, phone in hand, shouting into her Bluetooth headset. "They're turning on me," she snapped. "This was supposed to be sympathetic. Now they're calling me a thief and a liar. Jackson, do something." He said nothing. She turned on him. "You just stood there in court. You let that lawyer make us look like monsters." He sat down heavily. "I didn't make us look like anything." "I built this brand," she hissed. "I brought attention to our story. You think I wanted to humiliate myself for fun? I did it for Lucas." Jackson finally looked up. "Did you?" She froze. He stood slowly. "You told me this was to protect Mom, that we were helping her. But you've spent the last year planning how to use that money. You talked about flipping the house, leasing a Tesla. Lucas doesn't even need private school yet." Chloe's voice dropped an octave. "So what? That money was going to waste. She was hoarding it like a dragon." "It was her money," he said quietly. "From her brother. From a life we never even asked about." She narrowed her eyes. "You're not taking her side now." He didn't answer. She shoved her phone into her purse, grabbed a suitcase from the hallway closet, and snapped it open. "I'm going to my mother's." "Maybe she'll understand betrayal." "You mean she'll let you keep pretending you didn't cause this?" Jackson asked. She didn't reply. The door slammed behind her. For the first time in what felt like months, their house fell silent. Later that night, Jackson sat alone in the kitchen, a beer in one hand, his phone in the other. He scrolled through the messages. Some from friends. Some from people he didn't know. One message caught his eye. It read, "Your mom deserved better. So do you. If you stop now." I didn't know that message had reached him until he showed up on my doorstep the next morning. He stood there in jeans and a hoodie, a far cry from the polished professional who'd tried to take my rights away just days ago. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He sat on my couch, the same one he used to nap on during college breaks. The same couch he and Chloe had once snuggled on while watching movies, before life hardened all of us. "I'm not here to apologize," he said. I waited. Because I know that word's not enough. Still, I said nothing. He looked at his hands. "I just wanted you to know." I didn't know what she was really doing. Not until it was too far. And I didn't stop her. "That's on me." His voice cracked a little, and for once there was no performance in it. "I lost my job," he said. "For now, at least. They said it's about image, but maybe it's a blessing." I watched him for a moment. "You didn't look at me once in that courtroom." I couldn't. "Why?" "Because I knew you were telling the truth," he whispered. "And I didn't deserve to look you in the eye." We sat in silence. Eventually, I stood and walked to the kitchen. I poured him a glass of water and brought it back, placing it on the table between us. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said. "But I'm ready to believe you want to change." He nodded. And for the first time in months, the silence between us wasn't angry. It was hopeful, fragile, but real. Of all the conversations I had during those long, bitter weeks, the one with Grant Turner was the quietest. It took place on a Monday morning in his office lined with legal books and soft lamplight. I wore gray slacks and a sweater I'd knitted years ago. A modest outfit, but something about it made me feel grounded. Grant offered me tea, which I declined, and then sat across from me with a folder in his hands. "You know," he said, "without preamble, we have enough for a countersuit." I didn't speak. I just watched him carefully. Defamation. He continued tapping his pen once on the folder. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Attempted financial abuse. Not to mention the public damage from her little influencer meltdown. He waited. I looked at my hands. My nails were clean short. I had trimmed them the day before while listening to the rain tap against my window. That had always been my way. Doing something small with care, even when the world around me felt enormous and messy. Grant leaned in, his tone gentle. "Margaret, we could pursue damages. We'd likely win. And, frankly, it would send a message." I nodded slowly, then asked, "Can I say something that might sound strange?" He smiled faintly. "I've heard stranger." I folded my hands in my lap. I'm tired of being angry. Tired of thinking in terms of punishment. Grant's face didn't change. He just listened. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want peace. But I want them to understand that I'm not the woman they used to control. I'm not just Mom. Not the version they summoned for childcare or errands or bailouts. I'm not the shadow that follows behind cleaning up their lives." I straightened my spine. I want them to know I'm no longer for sale. Not for forgiveness. Not for silence. Not even for family. Grant didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "That's the strongest answer you could give." We shook hands and I left. That same afternoon I went straight to my lawyer who had handled my estate planning. A soft-spoken woman named Evelyn who had done my will years ago when Jackson and Chloe were still newlyweds and Lucas was still in diapers. She looked up as I entered. "Everything all right, Margaret? I need to revise my will." She paused. "Completely." "Yes," I said. "Start from scratch." I sat across from her and explained with clarity and calm what I wanted. That Jackson and Chloe were to be removed entirely. That Lucas would receive a modest trust for education and nothing more. That the bulk of my estate, the $20 million I had quietly guarded, would go elsewhere. To where Evelyn asked gently. And that's when I finally smiled. "A scholarship fund," I said. "For single mothers." She raised an eyebrow. "Any particular group?" "Yes." Women who were left behind. Who raised children without help. Who were dismissed, disrespected, and still chose to love. The kind of women who don't show up in headlines but carry whole families anyway. Evelyn blinked. "That's a very specific group." "I know," I said softly. "Because I was one of them." She nodded and began typing. It took less than 2 hours to rewrite everything. By 4 p. I had signed a new will established the framework for the Margaret Ellison Fund for Single Mothers and named Diane Carter as executor. When I handed Diane the paperwork that evening, she stared at the front page for a long time before speaking. "You're sure?" I nodded. "Completely." She looked up at me. "You know they'll find out." "I want them to." Diane took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. It's going to hurt them. I folded the papers gently and placed them back in the envelope. Good. It should. She looked at me, eyes searching not for doubt, but for softness. And I gave it to her. I'm not doing this out of cruelty, I said. I'm doing it so they can finally see me as a person, not a bank account. Not a background character. Just me. Diane reached across the table and took my hand. You've reclaimed something bigger than money, she said. What's that? Your self-respect. I felt the words settle deep in my chest like a stone being placed exactly where it was meant to be. Not heavy. Solid. That night I made myself a small dinner. Just lentil soup and a slice of buttered toast. I ate slowly, listening to the classical station on the radio. No texts from Jackson. No surprise visits. Just quiet. And for once, the quiet wasn't lonely. After washing the dishes, I sat at my kitchen table and opened an old photo album. One I hadn't touched in years. There was Jackson as a toddler holding my hand at the park. Chloe on their wedding day beaming in her white dress. Me off to the side smiling, always slightly out of frame. I closed the album gently. Some stories end with a bang. Others end in court. Mine was ending with a door closing softly and a lock clicking into place behind it. Not to keep the world out, but to keep myself safe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone to come home, call me back, or change their mind. I was already home. And I had changed mine. Of all the envelopes I had opened in the past few months, some bearing legal threats, others filled with apologies too little and too late, none felt quite like the one I held that morning. It was a small white envelope wrinkled at the corners, with smudges of what looked like peanut butter on the back. There was no return address, just my name in large, uneven letters across the front. Grandma Margaret. The handwriting was unmistakably Lucas's. My hands trembled slightly as I slid a butter knife along the edge and pulled out the folded paper. Lined notebook paper. Bright blue ink. No punctuation, no capitalization. Just emotion. Dear Grandma, I miss your apple pie. I miss the bear story. The one with the sleepy one. Dad is not happy. Mom doesn't talk to me much. I want to come to your house. Can I come in the summer? Love, Lucas. I sat back in my chair and pressed the letter to my chest. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't long. But it undid me. Because for the first time in years, maybe since he was a toddler, Lucas had spoken to me from his heart, unfiltered, unprompted, and without anyone watching over his shoulder. He remembered the pie. The stories. He remembered the version of me that wasn't clouded by lawsuits or accusations or live streams. Just Grandma. The woman who read him to sleep and sliced apples with too much cinnamon and let him stay up 10 minutes later when his parents weren't looking. I didn't cry often anymore. I had dried up somewhere around the third legal filing. But that morning something inside cracked open like spring soil after the last frost. And I cried. Not from grief. From hope. I wrote back immediately. Dear Lucas. Yes. Come this summer. The garden is waiting. So is the bear. And the pie. Well, I've been saving the best apples just for you. Love always, Grandma. By June, he arrived with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a book under the other arm. Chloe dropped him off without coming to the door. She didn't wave. She didn't even look at the house. Just paused long enough for the car door to close before pulling away. Lucas stood in the driveway squinting in the sunlight. Grandma? I stepped outside. Right here, sweetheart. He ran to me and I opened my arms wide. He didn't say anything, just buried his face in my shoulder. I held him, memorizing the moment. The way his arms wrapped around me, the way his breathing slowed, as if something tight had finally unclenched inside him. For the next 6 weeks, we made a rhythm of the days. He helped me weed the garden in the mornings, though his version of help often meant watering the neighbor's dog through the fence or asking a million questions about worms. We planted snap peas and sunflowers. I gave him a journal and asked him to write down 3 things he noticed each day. Day 1. Bees don't like loud singing. 2. Tomatoes are not baby apples. 3. Grandma makes good grilled cheese. He had never kept a journal before, but he grew into it. Some days he drew pictures. Others he wrote questions like, "Why do parents yell?" or "Is it bad to miss someone who's not around?" I never corrected his spelling. Every afternoon we read together. Not just the Bear book. Though we read that one so many times I started to recite it from memory, but also new ones I picked up at the library. We read about space frogs' feelings. One evening we read a story about a young penguin who didn't want to be like the other penguins. Lucas looked up at me and asked, "Is it okay to be different?" I answered him the only way I knew how. It's more than okay. It's important. He didn't talk much about home, but he didn't have to. Some truths live in the silences, like when he asked if he could call me just to check in after the summer, or when he packed the journal in his bag so no one else could see, or when he paused after I tucked him in and whispered, "You don't hate Dad, do you?" I shook my head gently. "I don't hate anyone, sweetheart. I just hope people can grow." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "He yells more now. At Mom. And me." I smoothed the blanket across his chest. "That's not your fault." He nodded barely. "He says you're stubborn." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But sometimes being stubborn is what keeps people safe." He looked at me with those wide, questioning eyes, the same eyes Jackson had at that age, and said, "I think I want to be stubborn too." I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Good." We didn't talk about court, about Chloe's video, about the fight over the money, or the names erased from my will. We just lived. Every night I sat on the porch while Lucas wrote in his journal, the soft sound of his pencil against paper blending with the crickets and wind chimes. Sometimes I wondered what Jackson was thinking during those weeks. Whether he regretted what he had done, or whether he watched from afar as his son leaned into something quieter, safer, something he used to have but let slip away. One afternoon I received a text. It was from Jackson. Just a single line. "Thank you for giving him peace. Even when I didn't deserve it." I didn't reply. Not yet. But I didn't delete it either. When summer ended, Lucas hugged me goodbye with that same fierce grip. "Do I have to go?" I nodded gently. "For now." "Can I come back next year?" "Always." He paused at the car door. "Can I write to you?" "You better." He smiled, and it wasn't a sad one. It was the smile of a boy who had grown roots in 6 weeks. After he left, I walked back into the house. It was quiet again, but not lonely. On the kitchen table was a small note he'd left inside his journal. "Thank you for seeing me, Grandma. I see you too." And somehow that little line did what no court ruling or inheritance plan ever could. It made me whole again. It snowed that Christmas. Not just the soft passing flurries we usually get in our part of town, but a real honest snowfall. The kind that settles gently on the windowsill and muffles the sounds of the world. The kind that makes even the most ordinary porch look like a card someone might send you in the mail with the words, "Peace on Earth," scribbled in gold ink. I woke up early not because I had to. There was no turkey to put in the oven at dawn, no tray of cinnamon rolls to lay out for Jackson and Chloe. But because I wanted to. For the first time in years, I woke up on Christmas morning without anxiety clawing at my chest. No worry about what would be expected of me, no dread of feeling invisible in a house full of people I loved, but who had forgotten how to love me back. Just the quiet, clean air of a house I had made my own. Diane arrived first, bundled in a red scarf and carrying 2 large thermoses. One full of her famous spiced cider, the other hot cocoa with a hint of cayenne for the brave ones. She kissed my cheek and handed me a small gift bag with a candle inside. The label read, "Stillness." She smiled. Figured it was your year for that. Lucas came a little later. Chloe didn't accompany him this time, nor did she send any passive-aggressive notes about pickup times or dietary restrictions. He ran up the porch steps in a puffy coat, his eyes lighting up the second he saw me. Grandma. He was taller. His voice deeper. But his hug was still the same. Tight, honest, all in. "You remembered the bear story, right?" he whispered. I laughed. "You think I could forget?" Behind him, a group of 4 students trickled in. 2 young women, both single mothers who had received the first grants from the Margaret Scholarship Fund, and 2 more who would soon benefit. They carried small containers of cookies, homemade ornaments, and one brought a guitar. I had invited them not as a gesture, but as a reminder. A reminder to myself that healing isn't just about walking away from pain. It's about walking toward purpose. We shared a meal around a long, modest table in my living room. No grand dining room, no catered dishes. Just what we had cooked ourselves: shepherd's pie, garlic, mashed potatoes, roasted squash. Lucas had insisted on making a chocolate cake with crushed peppermint on top. "Grandma's favorite," he said proudly. Diane read a poem aloud, something quiet and hopeful. And the girl with the guitar sang a song her mother used to sing to her before bedtime. It was off-key in the best way, the kind that made your eyes water without even knowing why. There was laughter. Real, deep laughter. And for the first time in many years, I saw Christmas not as something to survive, but as something I could belong to. Around 7 p. Sound. After the dishes were done and the cider was almost gone, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Jackson. I stared at the name for a long time. Not out of anger, but out of caution. I had learned over the past year that healing doesn't mean reopening every door. Some doors remain closed not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. Still, I answered. His voice was quieter than I remembered. "Mom, I'm here." A pause. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," I replied. Another pause. He took a breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For the way I let things go. For the things I didn't say. For what I allowed her to do. I didn't rush to fill the silence. "I know you don't owe me anything," he continued. I needed to say it. I hope that someday, maybe, we can talk. Really talk. I closed my eyes, the warmth of the fire flickering against my face. "You don't need to apologize to me," I said gently. "What you need to do is live in a way that your son never has to apologize for you." Silence. And then a soft exhale. Okay. I didn't hang up in anger. I didn't slam the door with my words. I simply said, "Take care, Jackson," and ended the call. It was enough. That night, I curled up in my reading chair with a thick blanket and a cup of chamomile tea. Lucas had fallen asleep upstairs with the bear storybook still open on his chest. Diane was staying in the guest room, and the students had gone home promising to return next year and bring more friends. Outside, snow still fell undisturbed and unhurried. I looked around my house. It wasn't grand. It wasn't the kind of place you'd find on magazine covers or influencer feeds. But it was mine. Every inch of it had been earned. Through quiet sacrifices, long nights, and finally the courage to say enough. I thought about how they used to see me. How I let them. The helper. The giver. The silent one. How love made me easy to dismiss. And I thought about the Margaret who now sat in this chair. Not bitter, not broken, but whole, strong, free. And I whispered to myself, not in triumph, but in truth. They thought I was weak because I loved them. But for the first time in my life, I chose to love myself more. And that Christmas night, long after the house had gone still, I did something I hadn't done in years. I slept in peace. If this story touched something in your heart, if you've ever felt overlooked, taken for granted, or quietly erased in your own family, know that you're not alone. Margaret's journey is a reminder that silence is not weakness, and loving deeply doesn't mean accepting disrespect. Have you ever had to choose your own peace over being accepted by people who were supposed to love you? What would you have done in her place? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tap the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter in our collection of powerful, real-life revenge stories, full of family drama, quiet strength, and unforgettable betrayal. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Let's walk this journey together.